In the last episode of our exploration of the true history of Hindustan, we have seen with how much courtesy and nobility Captain William Hopkins presented his request to start a trading company in Surat in 1608. But due to the opposition from the Portuguese, the permission was not granted. And the same request was repeated by Mr. Thomas Roy in 1615 in front of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, and this permission was granted. In today's episode, let us review how the British changed their attitude and the situations evolved as soon as they started the trading company, which was called the British East India Company. And we also shall verify what exactly was this British East India Company. So this was the emblem of the British East India Company when they started the trade in Hindustan. The East India Company, or EIC, also known as the British East India Company and informally called as John Company, was a British joint stock company which was formed to pursue the trade with the East Indies, but ended up in seizing the whole control of the Indian subcontinent. And it was the beginning of the total devastation of glorious Hindustan. Now, let us see some more details about this British East India Company. As I have already mentioned, the British East India Company was initially called Honourable East India Company, or often John Company, which was based in London. An early joint stock company, which was granted an English royal charter by Elizabeth I on 31st December 1600. And this royal charter was the right or the monopoly rights to bring goods from Hindustan or India. The royal charter gave the newly created East India Company 21 monopoly on all trade in the East Indies, and the company had 125 shareholders and a capital of 72,000 British pounds. Initially, the trade goods were, as you can see in this photograph, tea, coffee, ginger, and other spices. Okay. Up to this point, everything went on smoothly. But what happened is, as soon as they started the trade, the British East India Company started bringing their private soldiers or commandos to Hindustan. And this was suspected by the people of Hindustan as the beginning of a new invasion as that of the Portuguese. But the real disaster started as soon as the British East India Company obtained a permission or right from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir to start trade in Hindustan. It is to bring products from Britain and to sell them in Hindustan. And this was the beginning of the disaster. So let us examine more details about this. How the East India Company gained power in Hindustan. In 1617, the company is given trade rights in India by Mughal Emperor Jahangir, as I have mentioned before. That's almost 2 years after starting the trade in Hindustan. By 1707, that is almost about 100 years later, dozens of small Indian states began breaking from the Mughal rule. This sets the perfect time for the British to take power over. In 1717, the British are given clear trading advantage when the Mughal Emperor Farrukh Shiar gave tax and duty-free trading to the company in Bengal. See what happens. As we know, the Mughal had already established their power in Hindustan, but they were not patriotic. And their only intention was to gain power in some way or other. So, For this Mughal emperor, it was not a big issue to give permission to this British for the trade in Hindustan, duty-free trade in Hindustan, to bring their products and sell them in Hindustan. And this was, as I have mentioned before, the real beginning of the disaster by the British. In 1757, the East India Company makes their move, led by Robert Clive, who was the chairman or the head of the East India Company. And this company troops win an authoritative victory at the Battle of Plassey. And in this battle, they defeated the Indian troops which were allied with the French. From 1757 to 1858, the East India Company became the leading power in Hindustan. And during this period, another important episode which happened was the East India Company started recruiting strong and healthy citizens of Hindustan as their private soldiers. And it was with these private soldiers also started the Plassey battle, and they won the Battle of Plassey. And once they succeeded in the Battle of Plassey, they changed again the attitude. The expansion of the British power was conducted by chartered companies and not by the state itself. So, this British East India Company was not a British government's company. It was a private company. And it was this private company which brought their soldiers and again recruited soldiers from Hindustan. And they started acting as a real government power to recruit healthy citizens of Hindustan as their own soldiers and to fight against Hindustan. The line between the two was often very blind or blurry, and representatives of the East India Company would bargain and fight with the local rulers for their right to build trading posts. Trading posts were defended by private militants. So what happened is they started the trading post wherever they could. And these trading posts were defended by their own private soldiers. Moreover, the company started imposing their own rules and obliged the people of Hindustan to obey to those rules. See how the situations evolved. Let us see what were those rules. Ruled with little or no interference from the British government. And they maintained its own army, as I have already mentioned. And those people who were recruited to their private army were called Sipais. These Indian soldiers were considered as second-grade soldiers, and this company restricted the Indian economy. The people of Hindustan had to produce raw materials for the British East India Company and were obliged to buy the British goods, and any competition with the British companies was prohibited. Again, the company put Indians' handloom textile industry out of business. See how the attitude of the British really changed. So, what all courtesy was initially exhibited to obtain the permission to start the trade was really false. And slowly more restrictions were imposed on the people of Hindustan. Indians produced raw materials but had to purchase the British finished goods. Indian competition with the British goods was prohibited. And cheap cloth and ready-made clothing from England dominated the market. Raw materials including tea, indigo, coffee, cotton, and jute were transported on rail networks. When these type of activities were increasing and the real cheating was on its move, resistance started, and it continued from the people of Hindustan. And in order to suppress such resistance, the British made all sort of brutal actions. See this representation. Please observe carefully. See, practically they dominated everywhere. People were even hanged on the trees publicly, and they commanded with guns and swords. If you are really patriotic, you cannot forget these episodes which happened and how things evolved when the British came. And in the next episodes, we will continue to review the total devastation and the total brutality committed by the British in Hindustan. So if you think that these details are important for a true citizen of Hindustan not to forget, if so, please share these episodes and these videos to your friends and relatives of the new generation, so that the new generation or the new generations will be aware of the real story of our nation, and they will become more patriotic. And then only the nation can develop. So, thank you very much for your kind attention to my words. See you in the next episode. Jai Hind.